In early 2025, as the dry winds of the Sahel whipped through Ouagadougou, the world heard a statement that seemed at first unbelievable. Standing before the national flag, Captain Ibrahim Traoré announced Burkina Faso will plant 15 million banana trees across the desert. For a few seconds, silence. Then the applause of thousands broke through, the dust echoing across the capital like thunder. But abroad, the reaction was instant and cynical. In Paris, commentators laughed on live television. Bananas in the desert. Is this another populist stunt? In Washington, analysts called it a romantic illusion from a soldier who doesn't understand agriculture. International headlines rolled in, a banana mirage in the Sahel. Traoré's green dream. Yet within Burkina Faso, no one was laughing. To a nation battered by droughts, sanctions, and dependency, that single sentence felt like a declaration of independence, not just from hunger, but from humiliation. For 6 decades, Burkina Faso's fields had been carved by famine and foreign aid. Wheat from Europe, corn from the United States, rice from Asia. Every bag stamped donation. Every harvest season a reminder that the nation could feed soldiers, but not its own children. Traoré's statement was not about fruit. It was about sovereignty. By choosing the banana, a plant that holds water, regenerates soil, and thrives in community, he was planting more than crops. He was planting the idea that freedom can grow, even in the sand. As he left the podium, the banner behind him read simply, 15 million trees. One nation, one future. And for the first time in decades, Burkina Faso dared to believe that the desert could bloom. To understand this project, we must first understand the paradox of Burkina Faso, a land rich in sun, poor in rain, fertile in spirit, yet chained by dependence. For decades, food insecurity has haunted this nation. Nearly 70% of its cereals and vegetables are imported. In 2022 alone, Burkina Faso spent over $600 million on food imports, a staggering figure for a country where the average farmer earns less than $2 a day. Foreign aid filled the gap, but also created a new kind of dependency. Shipments of rice and maize arrived each season branded with foreign flags. In exchange came policies. Subsidies cut land, privatized, and local markets flooded by imported goods. The message was simple: eat what we give you. Traoré decided to reverse that logic. Instead of waiting for aid ships, he turned to the land itself. His advisors proposed millet, sorghum, cassava, but Traoré chose bananas, and that choice stunned even his own ministers. Why bananas? Because this wasn't just an agricultural project. It was a strategic one. Bananas retain soil, moisture, regenerate fertility, and grow year-round, even where cereals fail. In traditional Masi and Fulani farming, banana groves once protected villages from erosion. Reviving them wasn't nostalgia. It was ecological science rooted in heritage. More importantly, bananas symbolized continuity, a plant that multiplies endlessly from its roots, just like a nation determined to survive. So when Traoré said, "If we don't plant freedom, we will import slavery," he wasn't being poetic. He was describing a geopolitical truth, that control of food has replaced control of armies as the new weapon of empire. Burkina Faso, a small, landlocked country with little water and fewer allies, had just challenged that weapon with a fruit. When Captain Traoré unveiled the Banana Belt project, few realized how vast its scope really was. This was not a symbolic gesture. It was a state-level agricultural revolution. Phase 1, 2023-2028, began in the fertile yet underdeveloped southwest, spanning Bobo-Dioulasso, Banfora, and Gawa regions once famous for their cotton and sugarcane. The government redirected $150 million from its own treasury, not loans, not grants, but sovereign funds to launch the first wave, 5 million trees planted on more than 30,000 hectares of idle land. Each field was mapped by drone, each plot analyzed by climate sensors, built at the University of Ouagadougou. Solar-powered drip irrigation systems replaced diesel pumps. Young engineers coded algorithms to track soil humidity and leaf health in real time. For the first time in the nation's history, technology tradition and patriotism moved in sync. To implement it, Traoré created the Green Vanguard, a coalition of farmers, students, and army engineers. Soldiers trained villagers in logistics. Agronomists taught the science of propagation. Teachers turned schools into nurseries. Funding was split 60%, state 40%, community cooperatives, and diaspora contributions. Villages formed microbanks of seedlings, where one banana shoot planted meant 5 to share. Traoré's declaration echoed across the ministry halls. We are not importing freedom. We are cultivating it. Analysts abroad saw it differently. Some called it nationalist romanticism. Others warned it could destabilize existing trade frameworks. But within Burkina Faso, people saw something else, a blueprint for self-reliance. A development economist in Ouagadougou summed it best. If this works, Burkina Faso will become the first food sovereign model in the Sahel, not by chance, but by conviction. The project was no longer about bananas. It had become a test of whether a nation long written off as dependent could design its own future line by line, seed by seed. From the dusty plains of Kaya to the riverbanks of Banfora, something began to move. Within weeks of the project's announcement, more than 50,000 volunteers, farmers, soldiers, students, and teachers registered to join what local media called l'Armée Verte, the Green Army. Across Burkina Faso, the sound of engines mixed with chants. Locally made tractors rolled out from the Ouagadougou Industrial Works, carrying crates of saplings marked with the slogan, Une terre, une foi, un avenir. One land, one faith, one future. But most of the work was done by hand. Under the burning Sahel sun, women dug trenches with improvised shovels. Students laid pipes for the new drip irrigation lines. Retired soldiers taught villagers how to build water reservoirs using leftover military drums. There were no contractors, no foreign supervisors, only determination. Every day felt like a ceremony. Folk singers revived old Masi and Fulani work songs, turning the planting fields into scenes of defiant joy. And among the workers, new heroes emerged. Aminata, a 27-year-old engineer who quit her job in the capital to design the first solar water pump, built entirely in Burkina Faso. Isaka, a former artillery sergeant who repurposed his unit's logistics trucks to transport saplings instead of ammunition. Fatu, a market vendor, who sold her gold earrings to buy 50 banana shoots for her village cooperative. Their stories spread across the radio and social media, turning personal sacrifice into national pride. An editorial in Le Faso Nouvelle captured the spirit. In a world where others build walls, we dig trenches to plant trees. The transformation was no longer about agriculture. It was psychological. For the first time in decades, Burkinabe citizens were united by creation instead of crisis. And from the rhythm of shovels and songs, a new identity was being born, one rooted not in survival, but in sovereignty. Then came the drought. By mid-2024, the skies above the Sahel hardened into a pale, merciless gray. Rivers shrank, wells dried, and nearly 30% of the newly planted banana fields withered before their first fruit. International observers were quick to react. The IMF released a polite but pointed memo. We advise the Burkinabe government to reconsider the current agricultural allocation to ensure fiscal stability. Translation: stop spending your own money on food sovereignty. The European Union followed with warnings about climate feasibility, suggesting that imported grain aid was a safer, more efficient option. One Western newspaper headline read, "Traoré's banana dream wilts under the Sahel sun." But inside the country, the tone was very different. As the first leaves browned, Traoré refused to retreat. He convened an emergency council, not in a palace, but under the shade of a dying baobab tree near Banfora. Elders, engineers, farmers, and soldiers sat together, faces cracked by sun and determination. Traoré spoke slowly. "If we beg, we die standing. If we organize, we live." Those words became a battle cry. Within 48 hours, the movement called "Dig Before You Beg" swept across the nation. Citizens dug by hand to expand old colonial-era canals, built earth dams with sandbags, and redirected gray water from cities toward the new plantations. The diaspora responded too, sending pumps hoses and fuel money through community networks. Then, as if the land itself was listening, the rains came weak, hesitant, but enough. Nearly 40% of the banana fields survived. An agronomist in Bobo-Dioulasso said, almost whispering, "It wasn't the rain that saved us. It was the people." For the first time in modern Burkina history, a national crisis had not led to aid appeals or external loans, but to collective action. The project had faced its first test, and it had survived. From that moment on, the Banana Belt was no longer seen as an experiment. It was a rebellion rooted in soil. A year later, when the rains returned in earnest, the desert no longer looked the same. Where sand once shimmered, long rows of green rose in perfect symmetry, 5 million banana trees waving gently beneath the Sahel sun. In June 2025, the first harvest began. Children carried the fruit on bicycles, while women filled baskets with hands still calloused from digging. It wasn't a miracle, it was math, irrigation, labor, and patience. The numbers spoke for themselves. 5 million trees planted, 450,000 tons, harvested, 60% consumed locally, 40% exported to Niger, Togo, and Ghana. For the first time, Burkina Faso exported food, not raw minerals. And the economic ripples were immediate. Agricultural GDP rose 4.2%, food import bills dropped 15%, and small processing plants for banana flour, ethanol, and animal feed appeared around Bobo-Dioulasso. But something even deeper was happening: symbolism. The banana, once mocked as Traoré's fruit, became a national emblem. Children sang a new school song, "We Grow Freedom." Postage stamps featured the first green plantation under a golden sun. And on Armed Forces Day, soldiers paraded not only tanks, but baskets of bananas, a quiet nod to the battle that mattered most, feeding the nation. At a university ceremony, Traoré planted one more tree himself. The crowd erupted as he said, "Gold builds fortunes. Food builds nations." That image, a soldier planting fruit instead of carrying arms, went viral across Africa. It wasn't propaganda. It was proof that something was shifting in the continent's imagination. A political commentator in Bamako summarized it simply: Burkina Faso didn't just harvest bananas, it harvested dignity. By late 2025, what began as one country's mad experiment had become a regional movement. Satellite images revealed a thin green arc stretching across southern Burkina Faso, visible even from orbit. But the most powerful images came from people, not drones. Farmers dancing under banana leaves, children holding their first fruit soldiers, smiling beside tractors they once drove into battle. Soon, neighboring nations took notice. Mali, Niger, and Chad formally joined what they called the Green Sahel Front, pledging to replicate Burkina Faso's community-based farming model, using their own local crops, millet, cassava, and plantains. It was no longer just an agricultural project, it had become a political statement. In Geneva, Western diplomats privately called it an unpredictable shift. The IMF softened its language, referring to Burkina Faso as a case study in community-driven resilience. Meanwhile, in the streets of Ouagadougou, graffiti appeared on city walls: "We grew food, now we grow power." At the 2025 United Nations General Assembly, Traoré spoke again, this time, not as a rebel officer, but as the face of a movement. "You cannot eat resolutions. We grow revolutions." The hall erupted in applause that lasted nearly a minute, Even his critics had to admit the results were undeniable. Burkina Faso had not yet reached 15 million trees, but it had reached something far more important: belief that a nation long dismissed as fragile could become a laboratory of resilience. Today, the Banana Belt is more than a project. It's a metaphor that, even in the hardest soil, life can take root, if watered by courage. As one elder in Banfora put it, looking at the vast green horizon, "We used to wait for help. Now we plant it." And somewhere between those words and the waving leaves of the Sahel, Burkina Faso found its future.